Welcome to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. I'm your host, Shannon Ables, and whether you're listening on your commute, exercising, working in the garden, or sitting down with a hot cup of tea or a cafe au lait, thank you for tuning in. Let's get started. Welcome to 198th episode of the Simple Sophisticate. Today's episode welcomes a guest who's going to talk with us about love in our modern day and about how to more successfully navigate it. She believes in investing in your own life first and continually checking in with yourself to ensure that forward progress is always being made, whether it's small steps or grand strides. Because in all honesty, as she says, the good connections are going to be organic so long as we are being sincerely authentic ourselves. Now, the book is called The Love Gap, A Radical Plan to Win in Life and Love, and the author, Jenna Birch, is young. I point this out in our conversation, and she responds very generously, having interviewed men and women from all different situations with regards to relationships, having ones that have gone through divorce, others who are still single, those that are now married, and sharing their journeys. She has fully dedicated her attention to answering the questions that she has had, being the very rational thinker that she is. And as we talk, how this journey through discovering what she has shared in this book has changed her own approach in her own life moving forward. I applaud her for her forthrightness, for her dedication, and I am so happy to have her on this podcast. This young woman has done her research, and in everything that I read, and in what you will hear in this conversation, she speaks to an understanding of how to navigate this world that we live in that is constantly changing, and to navigate it in such a way to cultivate healthy, strong, loving, equal partnerships that will enable both people. But she's speaking from the female perspective, and this podcast aspires to inspire listeners to reach their full potential and discover what they're capable of and not shrink to make others feel more comfortable. She is very much in alignment with this concept of simply luxurious living. And, well, let's just get to the conversation. Don't forget, she is also going to be sharing her own simple pleasure, her petit plaisir, at the end of this episode. So stay tuned for that as well. Joining me today is health and lifestyle journalist and now author, Jenna Birch. Her new book, which was just released this past January, The Love Gap, A Radical Plan to Win in Life and Love, is a guide for navigating modern relationships and understanding the gender dynamics that impact them in our modern world. Welcome to the podcast, Jenna.
Thank you for having me, Shannon.
Well, I'm excited to have you on the show because you've dived into a topic we're all curious about, and it is, like I said, dynamic. It's constantly changing. But I want to begin right off the top with your title. If you could explain the definition of the love gap.
So the love gap was sort of born out of there was a need to explain this phenomenon I was seeing. In particular, it was about why all these men were not dating the women that they told me that they wanted to date. So this was something that was happening in the research. There were like several studies that would come out that would say like men want these smart, ambitious, like full package women. And then I would have all these same women in my life having all these horrible romantic problems, like relationship rifts, guys who wouldn't commit, guys who said they wanted to commit, but then they weren't committing to them. There was all this stuff going on. And also in my own life, obviously it was also inspired partially by my own experiences. But I wanted to explain this difference between, sometimes what we think we want or what we claim to want is not actually the full truth. So the love gap is sort of just my way of defining why we don't always go for the people we want to go for, and particularly why men don't always pursue women that are, their supposed best partners based on research, especially men that are like really building their careers. That kind of lengthens our timelines to commitment. And to explain these commitment issues, I had the love gap, which is the entire basis of the book. Obviously, it gets a little bit more complex than that.
Well, and I think that's interesting because initially when I looked at the title, I'm thinking, oh, she's going to talk about the gap, why men aren't ready for these women. But it ultimately is a gap for the women as well as the men to understand what they're truly seeking versus what they say they're seeking on both ends.
Right. Definitely.
I think that, and you do break all of that down in your book, which I think is fantastic. And part of your book is to counter many books that have come before. Mm-hmm. Should I say they offer disinformation about dating? And there are many different concepts that you flip on their head, and I appreciate that. What did you find was one of the most valuable changes to our understanding of dating that needs to be understood in order to savor the life that we're living and also stop blaming ourselves for relationships that have not worked out?
I definitely looked at what had been said before, and I think I grew up on all these different books because I was that smart study, like I would study everything, was a bookworm, sponge for information. And I really kind of bought into the advice. If I'm a rules girl and you tell me like I can get, I can find the relationship I want by following these 10 steps, then I can follow these 10 steps. And I was not seeing any of the classic information work. And I would say there were, maybe a handful of books that I saw women, especially my peers, really buy into. Some of those were He's Just Not That Into You. That one gave women everywhere a complex, especially because I think that women were so floored that they could feel so wrong about the connection they felt with someone over and over again that, they're like, how could he just not be into me when I felt all these things? And I think that sometimes it's harder to gauge, but over time, a lot of these women were like, okay, there's something else going on. I don't think he's just not that into me. He's got like this more psychological dilemma going on. And I really wanted to dive into that in the love gap. Another one was the rules. And I think that behaving from a place of inauthenticity was really my struggle with the rules.
Yes.
It's not doing what you want to do or what you feel is right, like to pursue a relationship, but to have a very specific set of tactics that's supposed to give you a relationship and not maybe the relationship that's healthy or right for you. So whenever you're monitoring your own behavior and you're really not able to come at a relationship from a place of, you want to feel like you're your true self. That is like when you're at home with someone, when you can just behave in ways that are natural and you don't feel like every relationship hinges on the next text or the next bite or anything that's going to happen that could possibly throw you off balance. I think the rules were creating like these almost a house of cards, I think, where you could just pull one out and the whole thing was going to crumble. So that was another one I really wanted to combat. And another big book that came out, especially for career women, was The Case for Settling. That came out, I want to say, late 2000s. And I saw a lot of women kind of embrace that as like, maybe it's plausible. Maybe my expectations are too high. Maybe my standards are too high. And I can just, tweak my mindset and be happy with someone who's kind of a fit, but not really a fit. So watching women grapple with all these different schools of thought about relationships was just I dove in deep with those because I had seen, I guess the roots of them just ran so deep. When you have been following advice for maybe a decade at least or more, that feels very inauthentic or it's not bringing about the results you want, it's really hard to like go back to basics and get in touch with yourself and your own needs again. So that was like the basis of my book, was trying to come from a place where I offer suggestions and advice, but I also never wanted to tell women what to do. And I never wanted to tell women to change themselves. That was like the core guiding principles when I went into the book.
And that comes out as we go through the book, this idea of being authentic, allowing yourself to thrive, to be successful, to earn more money, and not to apologize or to shrink. And I appreciate that about the book. And I think what those books you were previously talking about imply to us is to not trust our intuition, to not trust what we innately want to do or are curious to do. And then it throws the whole cycle off because then men get the wrong message about what we're supposedly doing and what we're supposedly wanting to do, as you mentioned in one of your chapters. And then everything's out of whack.
Yeah, I think that what was really crazy was all these spirals that I would see people very attached to relationship situationships. Sometimes people call them. They were like budding relationships. And both parties were really attached to it, but like for no apparent reason. Like when you actually sat down with people and been like, okay, well, what do you like about him? Like, why do you want to pursue this relationship? It was all like, here were the steps that got us to where we are. But like, am I really happy? Does this person make me happy? Are they compatible with what I want in life? And usually those answers were not no, but we got so wrapped up in the process of building a relationship, gaining any relationship, that we kind of lost ourselves and our own needs in the process.
It's as if we're following society's, okay, I'm doing this step, I'm doing that step. This feels right. It's supposed to feel right, but it's not really feeling right for me. It looks like it should feel right.
In this generation, I mean, really, it kind of feels like we adopted such a difficult landscape. And I was becoming increasingly aware of that, especially as online dating has really boomed. That's been a huge thing with people feeling like they have options, like endless options. And then you also have these longer career timelines anyway, that's pushing back commitment. The more education you have, typically the later you marry. And all of these different things were impacting commitment and like how we were getting relationships. And because relationships felt more scarce, people were getting more attached to the process of building any relationship or making any relationship work instead of, is this fulfilling? Is this right for me? Like going through all those checklists that are very personal, we were kind of throwing our own needs by the wayside and just like getting attached to the process of relationship formation. And that's really not enough. It wasn't making anybody happy. It wasn't making my friends happy. It wasn't making any of the people I interviewed happy. All my single daters were in this like chaos of just like trying to figure out if a guy would commit. But sometimes they didn't even ask themselves if they liked the guy enough to commit to him. So that was my big thing, was, okay, we need to get back and check with ourselves.
I think, and that's, I want to kind of delve off into another angle here with regards to masculinity and femininity. And this, we are shifting in our society in the 21st century, especially with regards to women. Women are encouraged, as we're seeing with so many different movements, to step up to, and oh my gosh, I'm so behind that. That's just an understatement. But we seem to be leaving behind the men or the boys during their childhood, as you say, not letting them be comfortable with expressing emotions and letting them know that that is absolutely a strength and not a weakness. And so I'm curious, how does this gap with regards to how we're raising children, boys and girls, especially the boys in this situation, how does that contribute to the gap? And how can we shift that mindset to enable both men and women to reach their full potential? Because ultimately, if we're just focusing on women, we're leaving behind the men. That's not going to help anything out. But we also can't forget about the women. So it's two-part process.
It's definitely difficult because it starts at such a young age with boys, and the way that we talk to boys, the way we raise boys. I mean, I even love studies that look at the language we use with boys. It's so different than the language we use with girls, which is very multifaceted and emotionally based and encouraging. With boys, it's, how much have you achieved? Have you won? Are we proud of you? Like all these achievement-based language where these are objective benchmarks where their worth is very much measured in how well they're doing that day. Like if they're, succeeding in the office or on the soccer field when they're little. Like it's all these different ways that we like coach and build self-esteem for men and women. And what's tough is that I think the more that we talk about the need to have like this very emotionally evolved language with men and give them space to just, especially as boys, to express themselves fully and to have a full range of emotions and to not be like this firm stoic male. At the same time, that's already been ingrained in the generation of men that are forming relationships. They're already behind and we can't go back and redo that time. So basically what I wanted to do with women is kind of just be like, hey, this is what the guys that you're dating have been up against. This is kind of how they've been coached to be this like strong, stable breadwinner who's like the best at everything. And, his worth is attached to that. He doesn't have as much space to be open emotionally. And a lot of his first exposures and early exposures will be in the form of romantic relationships. He'll be working out those kinks as he goes, and trying to be more emotionally expressive when those spaces didn't really exist in the past. And I think that the more we have that discussion, I really hope that like younger generations are going to be armed with better tools to open up in relationships and have a more emotionally evolved relationship life and be okay to be vulnerable with someone and really take risks and realize that, they're not going to, so many men had these ideas that they had to be like a full breadwinner or like they weren't going to be worthy of a relationship. That the whole process of growth was not, taken into account, that there was some kind of endpoint where they would be where they needed to be to have a relationship and focus on emotions. So that kind of mentality, I think, is very different than the way that women approach relationships, because we're given more leeway to define our own terms, the things that we want to navigate, what builds our own self-esteem, build relationships, have this more fluid trajectory to fulfilling our needs. And when we have that freedom to do that, we don't realize that that's less of a mental load. And I think that we're ready for relationships earlier, and we're just better equipped to build them. We have them more natural skill set because of the way that we were raised. And men, I think they're not really as aware that they were raised differently. I mean, they know if you look at it and pull it away and you kind of talk to them about it, but they're not actively aware of that when they're like struggling to commit or be in a relationship.
Well, and I think everything you just shared is very important. It's being equipped. These are tools. These are things that we have learned, that have been taught to us, or not taught to us, as we just talked about with men. And I think that's the important part here. This is something we are taught. And we can still teach ourselves these things. So what are some of the skills? You have a chapter about the process for women with regards to reflecting on the various people we have dated. What are some skills both men and women can develop to be that person that is ready for a healthy romantic relationship?
Well, I think what I really wanted people to focus on, and this is why I didn't want to write this book where I was do this and get this result, because I think that doesn't take into account like individual difference and how important it is when you're in a relationship to like work with the other person. You have to meet them where they're at. And part of that is a gauge like on connection and how strong, like who you could be as a partnership, but also working with that person, realizing that they may not have a lot of awareness as to where their flaws are, and they have kinks to work out too. So one of the things that I really wanted people to understand is just like patience in meeting people where they're at. And I think that the crazy thing is that we have, as women, I feel like we were taught to like look for red flags. Look for red flags where a guy is like not totally ready to commit and like fully into the relationship. We're looking for reasons to discount him and like move him into the don't pursue box. And I think that didn't take into account so many stories I had from women who kind of figured it out along the way that, their now husbands or, long-term boyfriends said the darndest things in the beginning of their relationship about how they weren't going to commit, or like they didn't think they were ready, or like they were not skilled or equipped. And they were telling them that and communicating that. But as a dater, when you're processing that information, you're like, oh my God, I need to put him in the box where I'm not going to pursue that. And if that's what you want to do and you want someone that's like fully ready, then I'm totally here for like female agency. If that's like your path is different, I totally understand that. But if you want to like widen your pool and really maybe find the best match for you, you kind of have to like realize that there might be some baggage involved in that. And in working with someone on their baggage it can be a huge bonding process, and also just like a big gift that you can give to someone.
But on the flip side, I think I would look at it and say, do you want to take on that? Because you have to be in a place in your life where you're ready for that. And as you said in your list for the real deal people, are they going through a major life change? And you know what? Sometimes you have to let them go and go through that. And as you shared in one of your articles, I think you wrote on Man Repeller, or maybe it was in the book, that sometimes you let them go, and sometimes you do meet up in the end later, because you have to let them go, and you have to let go to pursue what you need to do to develop yourself as well. So it's depending on timing for both people, as you said.
And I think that discernment muscle is a huge one. And it's like, do I stick it out with this person? Can I make it work? I think that the biggest thing for me was you should always feel like there's forward movement. The trajectory is positive. That's what you want to think about. If you feel like you're stopping your life for somebody, that's where resentment starts to build. And you can't have a functional relationship that way. So when women are trying to make that decision, like, is this a feasible path for me right now? It really comes down to just, are we still moving forward? Slow steps forward are okay, but stopping for someone it's not going to build a healthy dynamic at all. And I think figuring out when to let go and really trust the connection. Like, if this is right in the end, like, he'll deal with his stuff and I'll, do my life, and we'll meet up in the end. Having that belief that if you cultivate these connections and you make those moves, that over time the investments that you make, one of them is going to pan out. And I really saw that with different women, and it isn't a guarantee. And sometimes you don't make the choice. You might look back and think, oh, I don't know, like maybe I should have made a different choice, or maybe that was the connection. But I really, really think that if you keep moving forward personally, and your relationship is moving forward, that's the best option. Like that's the best possible foundation for a good relationship. But using that discernment of, can we make this work, or do I just want it to work so badly? You can't force something that isn't moving in the right direction. So learning to let go is one of those it's a huge skill, and we don't like to let go when we invest in things. And that's like a huge psychological principle. We attach value to things that are ours, and like we've invested in them. And I think that that's one of the best decisions you can make, that whole sunk cost fallacy. Sometimes it might not be a sunk cost, but you just might not know where the fruit is going to like end up. Maybe it's the skills that you're developing, the foresight that you get engaging that connection. You just don't know how life is going to shake out.
It really is a paradox in many ways, in the sense that you may think you're letting go of something you invested in, but ironically, you are investing, as you just said. You just don't know where the payoff or the benefit's going to be until you get there.
Yeah, you won't see it coming. And that's kind of the beauty, I think, of relationships now, is that all these stories are so intricately wound, where I see everyone have these very specific steps, or if something would have changed, or someone would have made just a slightly different decision, it would have worked out differently. But you can't really see it until it all comes together in the end. So you have to be able to be comfortable with the decisions you're making, and know when, it's just not working, and be willing to say, this is good, but it's not enough, or it's not quite working. So we need to go our separate ways. And sometimes those breakups might be years in length, and you might come back together down the road. I wrote a story not too long ago called Generation Breakup Then Makeup, about all the people that were having these years-long, multi-year-long breaks, and then they were coming back together later. And those timelines to commitment based on building careers, traveling, setting up your life in different cities, being educated, like all these things take you different places. They halt timelines for relationships, and they force breakups. It doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship or the connection is wrong or bad. It just means that it's not working at a certain time. And eventually you need to get back on the same page with one person and moving in the same trajectory. But you have to know who you are first and set your own life up. And I really believe in investing in yourself first. And that will bring like a partnership together in the end that's going to be really fulfilling.
Yeah, the investment part is what is going to bring you to your, as you talked about, these women who are the EGs, the end goal, but this idea that if they continue to pursue what is their passion, and they're actually, they're kind of intimidating, but at the same time, they actually are what men actually want when they're ready for it. The study that you cite is done by a researcher and an economist, Naama Shenhav, who is a professor at Dartmouth. And she talks about the rising earnings of women and then the numbers with regards to delaying marriage. I want to share a quote that was in reference to that study. You say, "I want you to know that you may not find a mate who has all the earnings and success that you have, but you will find a complementary partner with whom you connect strongly, who fills the gaps in your life, and who has the self-esteem to understand how special your dynamic is. Eventually, you will meet this person. It will shock you back into reality of your desires. And I want you to be single when you do." And I want to focus on that last statement. Can you explain the importance of not focusing on "I'm still single," but rather understanding what it is one seeks in a partner and how they can be different, as well as self-development coming before we step into marriage?
The biggest thing that I think I internalized growing up too was the idea that relationships are very distracting. And the wrong relationships are equally distracting. Like they're going to absorb a lot of your energy. And the more energy you spend on people that just aren't quite right, or the more the more energy you spend there, the less romantic headspace you're going to have to focus on somebody that's potentially right for you. And I really think that it's like a blink and you miss it sometimes kind of situation, where there's going to be a window where it's going to open and close. And that's how relationships form. But if you are single and you are just kind of waiting, you've developed your life, you know who you are, happy with your friends, you love where you live, you're working in your job, like you're doing everything that you can do to have like the best, most fulfilling personal life, you will recognize that person so much more, the person that fits into your life and kind of makes it better in a way that you probably won't be able to see it coming in this like very objective sense. Because I think a lot of women that, we are successful, like we're very pulled together, we know what we're looking for. We've kind of always thought like, oh, well, I'm going to find someone that's kind of like me. And if you have that mentality, I think that you are less prone to feel the connection, and it might not be what you think. And I think that you have to have that clear headspace to be like gauging potential romantic connections in a light with how you fit together in like the overarching, like the whole schema of your life.
How you complement each other more than how you match each other.
I think that too many women, we get on like the checklist tangent. We're just like, well, especially if you're using like dating apps or online dating, where it's kind of like teaches you to just like, you've got to filter somehow. So lots of people filter. They have their own objective criteria and they just keep, dating that over and over instead of thinking, okay, well, like, what do I feel when I'm with this person? Like, do they make me better? Do they like open my life up? Do I see the world in a new way? Do they complement my strengths, complement their strengths and weaknesses? Like all of that. You can see that so much more clearly when you have that clear romantic headspace. And if you're in a relationship too that is less than fulfilling and isn't making you better, and you're trying to keep patching it up or things like that, or a lot of people get into on and off things. That's really common now, or things where they're really drawn out and nobody's really committed. That just takes up a lot of headspace that you're not going to be able to recognize those connections and be really in touch with yourself and what you need. I think that it's just, they're two different mindsets. And what I wanted women to get into the mindset of doing was to just keep checking back in with themselves. And all of that is to have like your life and your structures in place and look for that person that fills it out so nicely. And that's like a very organic thing, but you kind of have to recognize it as it pops up. And there's no objective criteria to try to just, cut the line and find the guy faster, figure out which one's going to, make the most sense. So that's my approach, is like to free up that romantic headspace and really like develop your life in this like beautiful organic way where you really love what you're doing.
That's good advice. No, I think that with regards to, it's a simple directive, but everyone's going to do it differently. Everyone's going to find a different path as they're doing that. So keep giving yourself that opportunity to have that clear headspace, and things that are distracting or not helpful, as you said, not going to move you forward, let them go. I want to talk really quickly about the primary audience, especially with regards to the people that you interview, because you interview a lot of different individuals, men and women, in your book, and they're primarily from the millennial generation. But I do think, and this is something we talked about before we started taping, is that this is a resource for anybody who wants a healthy, strong, loving relationship, which is why I wanted you to be on this podcast. The Simple Sophisticate audience is vast, and it includes men and women from all different generations. So I have two quick questions. The first one is, am I correct in assuming that you are a part of the millennial generation?
Yes. So I'm in my mid-20s. So I'm actually quite young and like right in the center of the millennial generation. But what's interesting is most of my friends have always been older. Like my best friend is 32. So like I'm very much in most of my social circle was quite older. So I had my foot in both doors for a very long time, both, when I had my younger set of friends and was kind of gauging how things were developing, like college and apps and things like that. And then I also had this older set of friends that have continued to develop relationships, and they have the same sets of problems. They're not that drastically different. I think modern relationships, they kind of have the same structures now.
Because you don't really include your own experience. You've shared a lot in this conversation, and I've also read a handful of articles where you've shared a lot about yourself. But in this book, you don't really share anything about your own journey. And so I'm curious, you base this heavily on research, which is very, makes this book very sound. So my question is, have you found how you approach relationships in your own life shifting because of what you've discovered through creating this book?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I was that person that I really felt like if there was a shortcut, like optimized way to do this, I would have found it. And I think that a lot of it had to do with me confronting my own vulnerabilities in what building a relationship was going to look like, what kind of relationship I wanted was going to look like. And I definitely talked to so many of the interviewees impacted me on a huge level. And I guess that the the women who impacted me a lot, like, were women who had been divorced. They were very, very insightful about the ways that they wanted to do relationships better. And all of that had come from, I did everything right the first time and it ended so poorly and it was never what I wanted. So, like, how am I going to completely flip the script to get what I want this time? And most of that was just like completely stripping away what everyone else told them that they should be doing, what society said they should be doing, and really getting in tune with themselves. A couple women, especially in the book that I talk about, they were both divorced. I'm thinking of two different stories, and they were the type where everyone in their life were saying, like, you need to let this guy go. And they both told me the exact same thing at the end of it all. They're like, this is really hard sometimes, but like at the end of the day, I would choose this person. He was worth like all the frustration that we had in getting to where we are now, because it was the relationship that I wanted. It was the partnership that I wanted. And I really meditated on that. Like, what were my vulnerabilities? And I think a lot of it had to do with, there was no way I could predict the outcome. I'm one of those people that I like to know the outcome in advance. Like, I'm pretty good at predicting, if you give me a set of variables, like what's going to end up happening. And relationships are a little bit faultier because they rely on someone else that I can't control. Like, that's a control issue within myself. And I've always struggled with that in relationships. And one relationship, I think I was just so deeply blindsided by how it ended up. We were in completely different headspaces. I felt a really strong connection to this person, but, and I felt like the connection was going to trump it all if I did all the right things, but it ended up falling apart anyway. He's like, I just can't do this. And so that relationship kind of shook me to the core because I had done everything right. A so-called, society would have told me I'd done everything right. But at the end of the day, when I really deconstructed like what it was and kind of, I was like, I don't even think he was the best match for me. And I really had to go back to the basics of what do I want? What am I looking for? And like, can I be really in tune with myself and engaging somebody that makes my life like better? And that's something that I really do when I date now. Like, I have been dating someone for the past several months, and I really think about that. Like, when I'm with him, he like makes me better, and not just in like a very basic way of like, I like having him around. No, he like pushes me to think differently and to like try more things. And, my weaknesses are things that he has strengths in. And I think that and seeing that manifest like in real life and really being in touch with that makes like the vulnerability part easier in a sense, because the payoff is so much greater. It's not just a relationship, but it's a relationship that like drastically expands me. And that's what I wanted people to think about when they were dating. Like, does this person expand me? Do I feel like I am more when I'm with them? And I definitely think about that. And I constantly think about that when I'm dating. And you don't want to feel stagnant, and you don't want to feel like you're struggling to make something work that's just not working out. And it took a while. It wasn't like I immediately either, got back out there and it's like, I wrote a dating book, so now I have like all the answers. It was like, nope. Like, I think that I didn't really truly connect with someone for another year after handing in the manuscript. So it was like definitely like practice, like continually like being discerning about, the people I spent my time with. And was this really working? I think that you have to really give each connection a different kind of chance and really just feel like, is this making me better? Am I becoming more like who I want to be? Does it feel healthy? I think that that's big too.
I think the part that you end on in the book, and I think this is something to talk about quickly as well, is maybe you're not really into commitment. Maybe being in a relationship is not for you, at least not at this particular time in your life. And you have a list of questions here to ask yourself, and I'll just share one of them. Do I believe it's more important to find the right person and build a relationship with him despite any bumps in the road? Or do I believe it's more important to create the right relationship, as you've been talking about just with that example, with a compatible partner, steadfast in all ways? And there's a few other questions, but we don't always have to be pursuing, as you said. We have to have that clear space to recognize it. And I think that's important, not only for the millennial generation, but for everyone to realize it's not, if I'm not in a relationship, I'm not enough. This is a journey period, and each of us are going on a different journey. We're going to find different people along the way. We might find our real deal early. We may not. And that's okay. I think that's a huge takeaway. That's why I appreciate, even though you're speaking directly to the millennial generation, you're not. You're speaking to so many of us. As you said, you spoke with women that were divorced and said, I did it right. And I put that in air quotes. It didn't work out. And so you examine that. And I thank you for taking the time to do the work for us, because there is so many different components to look at, and it's not a simple process to try to break down, understand, but you've done it, Jenna, and I really appreciate you I appreciate the book. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
I want to wrap up really quickly on a little bit different note, but maybe not really. One of the weekly components of each episode is to end the podcast with sharing a simple pleasure. And so the question is yours to answer. What is a simple pleasure you enjoy during your everydays?
Oh my gosh. These constantly, I feel like this always changes too, based on like the place that I'm at in my life. Right now, I'm like kind of, I guess I'm like retooling just like these new routines, like getting back into the swing of writing. So I feel like I have now a daily ritual that I do that kind of like turns on my brain to like have inspiration. And part of that is like get up in the morning. I like grind coffee beans. I make a very basic like pot of French press coffee. And then I sit down and I spend 2 hours just like writing, like inspiration, whatever I want to write that day. And that is my simple pleasure, where I get like really in touch with myself. And I feel like it is the most calming, peaceful thing that I do on a day-to-day basis. And I think the process of having something every day that you can just like connect with. For me, it's just like make the coffee, sit down, have a couple hours of inspiration, and then dive into your day. That's my simple pleasure.
You make the space that works for you. That sounds lovely. That sounds absolutely lovely. I want to thank you for joining me today, because I think, as I said before, it is important to break down this concept of the love gap. And you reminded us to celebrate being intelligent, being accomplished, and being well-rounded. And I think this is most important. Be authentic, be ourselves, because our society, the 21st century, it's changing so quickly, and that does not miss the romantic aspect. That part is changing too. So thank you for pointing out how we can navigate it more successfully. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you liked it.
Listeners, her book is The Love Gap, a radical plan to win in life and love, and it's now available. And you can visit today's show notes for all the links to her website, her social media, as well as the book, thesimplyluxuriouslife.com/podcast 198. Thank you so much, Jenna.
Thank you.
One of the things that I always enjoy when I sit down and interview or have a conversation with my guests is we usually have a conversation before we start taping, and we have a conversation after. And I never really know how long or short those conversations are going to be. I want them to feel comfortable and make sure that I answer any questions up front before we begin. But in our conversation for this interview after the taping stopped, she did say a phrase that I wanted to share with you here with her permission. I felt that it just encapsulated in such a succinct way what her book is trying to do. And she spoke about the artificial pressures that are placed on women just because they're women, and these things are causing a lot of chaos. And she wanted to write this book to hopefully alleviate that unnecessary pressure that we feel sometimes, if not more than sometimes. And I heard her say that, and that phrase, artificial pressure, and she also mentioned artificial frenzy. And for me anyway, I felt exactly what she was talking about. It does feel like it's pressure being placed upon us. It does feel like a bit of a frenzy at times. I felt this obviously much more in my 20s. I do not feel it now, and it took a long time to get to this point. But it is, as she points out very well, it's artificial. It's created by the world we live in. And we can change that. We can shift that. And I think that puts the onus and the power back in our hands, and it feels much more comfortable and much more in sync so that we can listen to our own voice and strive forward. So again, her book is something that I think you'll enjoy if this topic has been dancing around in your mind and you had some questions about it, or you're trying to navigate, as we've been saying, through the journey that you're on with regards to relationships. And you can find that at the show notes, thesimplyluxuriouslife.com/podcast 198. Before I wrap up, I wanted to share 2 reviews that listeners have generously shared on iTunes as well on my Instagram feed. And I appreciate people figuring out a way to share, because I know sometimes iTunes can be confusing. So if you just email me a review, I will share it also. So this first review comes from Jess, who is from Australia. And she says, quote, I am a 29-year-old mother of 2 from Australia, and in the culture I come from, the values of quality and, dare I say, sophistication, she put that in quotes, aren't embraced with open arms. It is hard for me, as someone who has held values for beauty, quality, and embracing life's pleasures since I was a little girl, to feel authentically me within a culture that sees this as threatening or pretentious. I am so thankful to have found your podcast and your book, Shannon. As a fellow English and history trained teacher, I connect so well with your thinking and always leave feeling like those values are satisfied as you share new ideas and thinking around how I can grow in an adoration of quality living. I love the balance of inner wisdom and practical tips that you share and look forward to the indulgence of listening to your podcast every week on the preschool drop-off. Jess, thank you for sharing your life with us. Thank you for sharing something that I don't think you are alone in feeling, as far as being within a particular culture or community that may not value what you value, and finding the courage to stay true to yourself. You do have a lot of strength within you. That is very clear. So I want you to know how much I appreciate your time. And I know from what you've just shared, you are doing very well. So thank you very much. The second review comes from Gemma B., titled Great Inspiration. Quote, I discovered this podcast around New Year's and found myself diving into the archives wanting as much information as I could get. A month and a half later, I've finished the entire library. I look forward to each new episode so I can start my week off with an insight into how to live a more fulfilling life. Listening to Shannon is like listening to a best girlfriend. She's worldly, independent, and full of insight. I am so happy I found this podcast, and by using her advice, I've started to live a healthier, fuller life by enjoying the simple pleasures available around me. Gemma, thank you so much for your enthusiasm, but also with regards to the shift that you have begun to notice, the positive shift you begin to notice in your life. And I think so much of what Gemma points out is true about how we improve or create the life that we are dreaming about. It's a conscious choice, but if we don't have the tools, we don't know how to do what we seek always. So it is my hope, and it is always my intention, to bring forth what I learn, and so that you can apply it to your journey how it works best. Some things are going to be something that you will gravitate toward, and some things you're not. And that's okay. If you get just one gem out of every single episode, wow, I would be tickled with that. It may just be every other, or maybe once a month, but thank you for tuning in. And if you too are enjoying this podcast, even just ranking the star on iTunes is great feedback. And when you share your specific insights and words and experiences with this podcast, it helps future listeners understand what they will discover. So I have a few more reviews, but I will save them for future episodes. Thank you to everyone for tuning in, and enjoy this first full week of March, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. For more ideas and inspiration throughout the week, stop by the blog, thesimplyluxuriouslife.com, or pick up the book, Choosing the Simply Luxurious Life, A Modern Woman's Guide, now available in paperback as well as ebook and audio versions, which are available on Audible, iTunes, and Amazon. And to receive exclusive news as well as an extra dose of inspiration to jumpstart your weekend, subscribe to the Simply Luxurious Life's weekly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox each Friday to enjoy with a hot cup of tea or a morning cup of coffee. Until next Monday, I'm your host, Shannon Ables. Bonne journée.